It was so frustrating for me to get into the field, and I don't want people today to feel that level of frustration. It just shouldn't be that hard.
Welcome, everyone, to the Industrial Security Podcast. My name is Nate Nelson. I'm here with Andrew Ginter, the Vice President of Industrial Security at Waterfall Security Solutions. He is going to introduce the subject and guest of our show today. Andrew, how's it going?
I'm very well, thank you, Nate. Our guest today is Mike Holcomb. He is a fellow for cybersecurity at Fluor, and he's the global lead for industrial control system and OT cybersecurity practice. And he's going to be talking about changing careers. He's going to be talking about making the move from wherever you are in engineering, in IT, somewhere else, making the move into OT security.
Then without further ado, here's your conversation with Mike.
Hello, Mike, and thank you for joining us. Before we get started, can you say a few words about yourself and about the good work that you're doing at Fluor?
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity to come on the show, Andrew. And for those that don't know me, my name's Mike Holcomb. I'm the fellow for cybersecurity at Fluor, as well as the ICSOT or control systems cybersecurity practice at Fluor globally. For those of you that don't know about Fluor, we're one of the world's largest engineering and construction companies in the world. So we get to build, and I get to work in some of the world's largest industrial control environments. So I'm very fortunate not only to work in these large environments, but also work with some of the greatest engineering minds in the field today. So it's really exciting, and I couldn't ask for a better place to be in wanting to work in cybersecurity and securing all these unique environments.
And our topic today is getting started in the OT security space. Can we start at the beginning? How did you get started?
For when I got started, I go back to 2010 and getting into OT cybersecurity. So now I've been a long time IT cybersecurity practitioner, so 25 plus years. It was 2010 when Stuxnet was first announced. We got the news about this new, I was just amazed at this technological marvel that had been created to reach out in the world and manipulate something out in the real world. And I was just really fascinated with that concept. And of course, we had always thought about different types of attacks and things of that nature, but here is where we actually saw it pulled off. And it was very, very real all of a sudden. And then started asking the questions about, what about power plants and water treatment facilities or railways, right? What happens there? And started asking those questions, and then started reaching out to folks to have those conversations. And of course, back in 2010, there weren't a lot of folks that wanted to have those conversations. You had IT people that didn't care about OT, which didn't even really necessarily call it OT back then. And then you had the folks in OT environments that they didn't want to talk about cybersecurity because I think a lot didn't want to let on that they weren't doing anything for cybersecurity back then, and just didn't understand it. So it was a struggle initially for me. And it was really, really frustrating. I think that was probably for a lot of folks, at that time. And I just ended up 12 and a half years ago getting a call to go work at Fluor. Like I mentioned, we're one of the world's largest engineering and construction companies. And so after about the first year of working there, keeping my head down, trying to learn the ropes of the new job and get my feet under me, I started to realize, we probably have some control systems around here, and started making those connections with different engineers. And in the company, right now we have 4,000 control system and electrical engineers, for example. And so there's a lot of folks we work with all over the world. and there's quite a few that are always very willing to lend a hand, have a conversation, and jump on a call. And so I've been very fortunate just to build that knowledge kind of organically, kind of grassroots movement since, probably the last, especially, last 10 years, and getting into, working with the different departments, and then, really starting to build out what a cybersecurity practice for a company like Fluor looks like, to where we're helping our clients build, right, a cybersecurity program for their environments, whether it's a power plant, whether it's a LNG port facility, whether it's a light commuter rail or open pit mine, the manufacturing, and the list goes on and on. But we're clients didn't necessarily want to have those conversations even a couple of years ago. Whereas after Colonial Pipeline, that really changed the landscape, and all of our customers are very engaged and want to have those conversations. So for each of those projects, we look at building out the cybersecurity specs, again, to work with the client to understand their risk tolerance, their risk threshold, and budgets, and help them design again the right cybersecurity program for their environment.
So let me contrast that with my own experience. So we have two data points here. I got started. I had a computer science degree. I got started doing software development for the first 15, 20 years of my career. Eventually developing industrial control system product. Rising through the ranks of the development team, winding up managing teams. At one point, I was responsible for the IT security of the local office. And so I had dabbled a bit in the security space. This was, back before security was a real thing. It was like in the mid 1990s we're talking about. The big news that I remember was Y2K. Y2K was the big thing. It was, in a sense, non-news. Nothing happened. But there was enormous preparation on the industrial side that went into that, rebuilds, patching everything. It was amazing. And then there was, of course, 9/11, which, if you remember the Aaron Turner episode a couple of episodes ago, he talked about how the 9/11 event, how he was part of the process of that turning into today's industrial cybersecurity initiative. In about 02, 03, I was still working on the ITOT middleware that was connecting a lot of control systems to SAP, connecting a lot of these networks together, in hindsight, contributing to the security problem. And the business that I was part of was sold off. The new management said, we're taking this into industrial cybersecurity. And I said, really? That's a thing? Because this was 02, it was 03. It was the very earliest days of that. I finished up the ITOT middleware project while, the rest of the business took our control system product and moved it to SE Linux, Security Enhanced Linux. So I wasn't part of that. I saw that from the outside. I thought, wow, that's a lot of work. It was a lot of work. And as far as I can tell, nobody, 0.0 sales. That was not what the world was looking for. I got pulled into the project to build the world's first industrial SIEM, Security Information and Event Management System. In control systems terms, it was a single pane of glass. It was an HMI for cybersecurity of your control system. And that was how I got involved. That project went on for a long time. Eventually, I got pulled into promoting that project out in public, talking to prospective customers at conferences and face-to-face about the cybersecurity problem landscape, the solution landscape, where the Industrial Defender SIEM fit into that. Industrial Defender has long since moved on. This was 15 years ago. I don't think the SIEM exists anymore, but that was my own genesis. Dabbled a bit on the IT side, heavy into software development, very technical, and got pulled into the product development side. of industrial cybersecurity in sort of the mid 2000s, almost to my surprise, because somebody else did the market research to figure out there was a market here. This was a thing that was happening, because I'd never heard of it. It was very early days. So that was 12 years ago. Very few people were doing this stuff. It was possible to sort of drift into it, just show some interest and, become part of the evolving field. What's your advice today if you've got people who want to get into the OT security space?
I definitely have a lot to say about that subject. One of my favorite to talk about, since it was so frustrating for me to get into the field, and I don't want people today to feel that level of frustration. It just shouldn't be that hard. And so, when you talk with folks with IT backgrounds like myself, and there's to help get started, really, there's a focus on needing to think like an engineer. I always go back to when I took my first SANS ICS OT course, the GICSP. It was really fascinating. The best thing about the class was it was half IT people and half OT people. And I remember a gentleman in the front of the class asked a question, and it was really what I thought was a really basic question around networking. It's like, oh, I could answer that, but it was the way he asked it. It was completely different on how I would have thought about it. And started talking with him, and he was an engineer in a water treatment facility, and that was really a first time I had talked with somebody from that world, and really starting to look at things from his perspective. And so I think that was a great experience. And so coming from the IT world, we have to, again, learn to think like an engineer, see how they see the plant, how the plant works, and understand each plant, each OT environment is completely unique, right? They have their own physics. Even you can go to two different power plants and they can be completely different. And so being able to understand how that plant operates, that's a first part of not only helping us understand how best to protect it, where we're focused on how do we ensure physical safety of on-site personnel and the general public, and environmental safety, and then of course the operations of the plant. And that's very different from the IT world, but it's the engineering world. And so when you look at learning to think like an engineer, and then the other really is just, I think, it can feel like a very unsurmountable hurdle to people, is learning about different OT systems. And you get caught up. At least for me, I remember, ICS, OT, SCADA. I'm like, what, is RTU, HMI, PLC is, well, what are all these things? And it's like, oh, you can learn some acronyms, and then you can start to read about them. But it's challenging, right, at first, until you can really start to get your head wrapped around the concepts and understand how each of these different assets works, and how you use that to build and run a OT facility. Right. So I always like to, focus on, when I do a couple, free classes every quarter, that is, we focus on, how we build a power plant from start to finish, and walking through that process, because it helps people not only think like an engineer and understand the physics of how we're generating electricity in this facility, but we can also look at all the components that go into building out that facility. And we can then really learn about, PLCs and HMIs and DCS, and what each is doing and what they really mean. And I think that really helps to click into place for IT people. But it's very foreign. I know it was, at least for me, when first getting into OT.
So that makes sense in a sense, in the abstract. Learn about the physical processes that you're looking at. Learn about the automation systems. Do you have concrete advice? Is there stuff, would you read about these things? Do you take courses? What are concrete steps people can do to achieve those goals, those learning goals?
Sure, no, a great question. And I actually should mention I wrote a couple of free ebooks that I published, and they're on LinkedIn and my website MikeHolcomb.com, where people can find them, and they're not too involved. And mostly it's a list of different resources and some, I guess, tips and tricks, and a lot of those go into some of those practical tips. Right. So suggestions on different books that you can read. There are some great books that are out there. They're not a ton, but I think there's definitely a few that everybody should be reading. Even books like Sandworm, just to get an understanding of the importance of ICS OT cybersecurity. I'm a big fan of a few others, so I don't want to, I guess, go too far down that rabbit hole. But between books, I honestly take a lot of value out of podcasts. I listened to your podcast before. There's a few others in the space I also listen to. You have a lot of great guests that come on and share a lot of practical knowledge that people can learn from. I remember I was starting a new mining project at Fluor, and I had not worked in mining before. And just at the time, you actually had somebody from mining on the show, and I was able to pick it up, and I learned so much from that conversation. And so that's one way. Trying to get hands-on experience. I understand. I was very fortunate that it wasn't too long before I was able to go on site and be in an actual power plant that we were building. That's a luxury I understand a lot of people don't have, but you're trying to get some type of hands-on experience, right? So whether it's building out a home lab, getting a PLC, starting with some basic PLC programming, maybe hook up an HMI and start to build that out. So those are some of the things that definitely suggest. So yeah, there's books out there. Again, I really take a lot from some of the podcasts out there, including your own, and then trying to build into that hands-on experience. If you don't have the luxury of already working in OT, or maybe you can find a mentor and that works in OT and that they can bring you on site. Sometimes I hear that happening from time to time, and that's a lot of experience, especially people from IT. That's experience that you just can't even pay for.
So at this point, we've talked about how Mike started off in the industry and how, Andrew, you started off in the industry. I don't participate in the industry to the same degree that you guys do, but of course I do in a tangential sense. And I recall that when I was getting first started, I had a little bit of background in IT knowledge, but I didn't know the first thing about industrial security. And I, as Mike suggested, picked up a book. It was a red book. It was your book. On a long flight, I believe it was an 11-hour flight. I pushed through most of your red book. And by the end of it, I had a good enough sense, a good enough base to start talking about these subjects, mostly just asking you questions. And so I can empathize and agree with Mike's general sentiment.
The latest numbers in the 2023 threat report on OT cyber incidents show that the threat environment has changed fundamentally at the beginning of this decade. OT cyber attacks with physical consequences have changed, from a theoretical problem to a very real problem, more than doubling every year. The new report is focused on deliberate cyber attacks in the public record. These are attacks that cause physical consequences in process industries and discrete manufacturing. Most of these attacks are ransomware, though the fraction of hacktivist attacks is growing. And the report's appendix includes a complete list of all cyber attacks since Stuxnet that meet these criteria. To see how today's OT cyber threat environment has changed, I invite you to download the report, a joint effort between Waterfall Security and the ICS Strive OT Incident Repository. You can download the report at waterfall-security.com/2023-threat-report, or just go to the resources menu at the Waterfall Security site and click on white papers and eBooks.
So to put the shoe on the other foot, you came from the IT space into industrial control systems and OT security. Do you have advice the other way around if people are coming out of engineering or other sort of aspects of the OT space and want to get up to speed on cybersecurity?
Sure, definitely. And I get with that disclaimer, right? I am, tried and true. I have a IT cybersecurity background, but I do work with a lot of folks in the OT space, and I work with, I get to meet a lot of folks on LinkedIn and elsewhere to have conversations with and help and so whether it's at the office or elsewhere, I always talk about, for folks coming from an OT background, one of the things that really surprised me is a lot of OT people or that come from different aspects of automation, they don't necessarily have the fundamentals of networking down. I was really surprised. I always think, of engineers, they know everything in the world, and I found a lot of engineers aren't that familiar with networking. I was really surprised. So it's just like if anybody coming into IT cybersecurity, the first thing I would suggest they learn is networking, especially of course with TCP/IP, since that's the main protocol that we use on all of our internal networks, right? Even in OT, for better or for worse, and the internet, of course. So that's that basic, foundation for connecting our systems together, and then learning the basics of cybersecurity. So I always tell folks to really look to the Security Plus certification that CompTIA has. And even if you don't necessarily look to get certified, even though I suggest people always do, but just the knowledge that you can pick up from picking up one of those study guides or going through a Security Plus course, or except you get the basics, the fundamentals of cybersecurity from the IT perspective. And then that really gets us to where now we're on this kind of common playing field where we can have folks from the OT side of the house and the IT folks from their side of the house really come together. And I always talk about we always talk about these different sides of the house, but we always forget that it's the same house that we're all living in and trying to protect. And so we can come together with kind of this basic understanding of networking and cybersecurity and learn from each other's perspectives, and then you kind of put it together to build out that plan on, okay, how are we going to protect our house from somebody trying to break in and do harm?
So you mentioned the Security Plus certification. A question that I get regularly and have limited insight into answering is sort of the more general question about certification. What should I be certified on if I want to practice in the OT, the industrial security space? You've mentioned Security Plus. Is there a more general answer?
Yeah, and when we talk about OT cybersecurity, there's the certification landscape is somewhat limited compared to the IT world, but there definitely are some certifications that are worthwhile for people to pursue. I think, in my opinion, I always struggle sometimes because I always want to make sure or focus people really are working on gaining the knowledge and the experience to work in OT cybersecurity, and not just trying to go take a quick course and take a certification exam and then I don't know, imply that they know everything about OT cybersecurity, because certification, that's not the goal, right? That's not the end game for those certifications. But there are some great certifications out there. From the typically, especially in the U.S. perspective, we look to SANS, and not only the SANS Institute and their courses and certifications that we can mention. I have all three of those in part, partly going through the master's program and also just being a longtime SANS student and having taken those courses, that I've been very fortunate to do so. And then the ISA IEC 62443 series as well that ISA created. So I think for me personally, the knowledge in the SANS courses is bar none I also realized that I was very lucky when I took the SANS grid course with Rob Lee. It was actually at the exact same time that the Trisis incident was happening. So not only am I sitting in class with Rob Lee, who's teaching, and we would get to have cyber conversations and go to dinner, and but also his company is responding to one of the most important cybersecurity incidents in the OT world still today. And so we were getting play by play and what was going on behind the scenes, which that's that you still can't pay for an experience like that. Which does bring up the fact that the SANS courses are very expensive these days. And I understand that not a lot of people can afford them. Again, the knowledge is second to none. Rob Lee still teaches his incident detection response course for OT a couple of times a year. I personally think to be able to be in the room with him and engage and ask questions, you can't that's invaluable experience. But again, $10,000 essentially now to take a class, and the certification exam is hard for a lot of people. Again, I'm very fortunate to work for a company that has provided me those opportunities. So the ISA series is a very valid alternative. I think a lot of people, and especially engineers, have the ISA certifications. They have 4 courses that you take, and then you have to take the course to take the exam. And it's about $8,000 if you're not an ISA member. So for their entire series, right, it's already less than one SANS course. And so I think the one thing to keep in mind about those courses is that they're designed to teach OT professionals some basics about cybersecurity and introduce the 62443 standard. It's not going to, and unfortunately, the master certification, right? When you pass all 4 exams, they give you what they call the ISA, IEC 62443 expert, cybersecurity expert certification, which is a horrible name because I think we could probably all realize that if you take, what is it, about 24, 30 hours, even for, let's say, 40 hours of course materials, and you pass a couple exams, it doesn't make you an expert in anything. So I think it's not a great name, but it's a certification that shows that you have a basic understanding of cybersecurity and different aspects of cybersecurity and how they're implemented in the OT world. So if you're looking at getting certified and demonstrating that basic level of knowledge, then I think the ISA series is going to be the most effective for people, in part because of the cost, and in part just because of the time and that there is learning involved, and there is good information to get out of it. And for me, SANS, it's, people always joke about drinking from the fire hose when you go to a SANS course, and you're just flooded with information. And they have some of the greatest thought leaders in the industry that lead those courses, like Rob Lee and Tim Conway, and with Michael Asante before them, and Derek Harp was on that original team. So you can't beat the SANS materials. It's just the cost is so expensive. So, and then there are other alternatives out there. There's the folks in Germany. I think it's called TUV Rhineland. One day I'll figure out how to pronounce it. I start to see more individuals with those. We have some engineers at Fluor, and I've seen others with the SCADA certifications. So that are a little bit like the ISA 62443, but a little bit SANS, and but more from the vendor perspective, with dedicated courses at again, like ISA, reduced cost, right? Relatively less expensive than SANS courses, but not as much knowledge or information.
So let me dive a little deeper. You mentioned people coming to a lot of training and desires to learn about cybersecurity without basic networking. I've observed that as well. Some years, depending on when the course runs, I teach a course at Michigan Technological University. The audience is mostly engineers. It's a graduate course in engineering, and Yeah, I find it necessary to burn, 2, 3, maybe 4 hours of a 40-hour pool of lectures, and assigned reading and exercises on the basics of networking. What is the Ethernet? What is a frame? What is, the ARP protocol? How do you resolve IP addresses? How does IP write on top? Once you leave the Ethernet into the internet, what does IP look like? Is this what you mean? I mean, how much of that, in your estimation, how deep on that do you really have to go?
I would say very similar when I do those types of classes. At least a couple of hours, and I do training also with our engineers at Fluor on a regular basis. Definitely at least a couple of hours. But I think that's the same concept, or the way I look at it is this idea that if we want to understand how to protect our environments from the attackers, and we have to understand how they're getting into the environment and how they're actually conducting and pulling off these attacks. And of course, they're doing this over the network. And so we need to be able to understand the fundamentals of networking to be able to ultimately better understand how to protect our environments. So we do cover everything from, again, focus on TCP/IP, since that's going to be the main protocol we're using in all of our environments. And of course, that opens us up to the wonderful world of internet connectivity, for better or for worse, and down to, we start to look at things like, how does ARP work, and how does IP routing work, and then that leads into the conversations like when we start talking about, well, how do we best protect our OT network? Well, we always are going to suggest we start with secure network segmentation. So you can't have those conversations about things like network segmentation and putting a firewall or a firewalled DMZ between IT and OT before we already at least have the basic understandings of networking. So that's why it's always definitely a big focus for me, is we need to understand the fundamentals of networking to be able to understand how all these components talk together, within IT, within OT, and now IT with OT, and then also on top of that, how we're connected to the internet all in one, some way, shape, or form. And so how do we, be able to protect the network from attack? But again, we have to have at least a basic understanding of networking before you can really start getting into those fundamentals, especially like things like, how do we do secure network architecture?
Now, you've mentioned standards, 62443. How big a role should standards play? How familiar do you figure that people on both the coming from the IT side or the engineering side into OT security, how familiar do they need to be with standards?
You don't have to, know them in and out necessarily unless your job requires you to, but I think they're great references, especially for people that are getting into cybersecurity. They're great references to starting to learn about the different aspects, right, all the different domains, everything that comes together to create a fully functioning cybersecurity management program in OT environments. And whether it's a power plant or a manufacturing facility or a railway, it doesn't matter the environment, but the standards will show you all the parts that you'll use no matter what type of OT environment you're in. So 62443 is the gold standard everybody looks to today, but it's not, you have to pay to get the full copy. So it's not something that's probably as readily available to everybody, even though it's still a lot of great information. I think that one can be a little overwhelming at first as well for some people. At least I know it was for myself. It just didn't come across as to me as kind of a straightforward standard. I think because it's written more from an engineering perspective. So for OT folks, it probably feels and makes a lot more sense than for folks coming from an IT background. I suspect, at least that's for me. Well, kind of what I was thinking. so I can also gravitate towards NIST, so we have NIST guidance in OT, and so people can also look to that as a standard. I think that has a much more kind of familiar look and feel if you're coming from the IT cybersecurity world. And it's freely available. So it's something that you can access today, and you can look through it to see, again, all the different components that go into building a cybersecurity program for an OT environment. So I do think they can make some great references. And then, of course, depending on if you work in an OT environment today, you might also have either requirements to adhere to those standards or frameworks, or you might also have other regulations, like if you're in power generation or transmission in North America or in the United States and Canada, right, you have to be very familiar with NERC CIP. So all great resources for either people that are in the field or for those that want to learn more about OT cybersecurity.
So, good list of resources there. The ISA standards, IEC 62443 standards, they're the same thing. You do have to pay for them. I don't pay for them legally. What I do is I buy an ISA membership. I just renewed my membership. If you renew early, you get a 20% discount. I think I paid $85 to renew. You pay this every year, and you get online access to the standards. You cannot download them. You cannot print them, but you can read them. This is what I do. I don't have copies of all the 62443 standards. When I need the standard as a resource, I log in on my ISA account. And Mike mentioned NIST. Let me go just a little bit deeper on NIST. NIST 853-53 is sort of the IT standard that everyone uses. The NIST cybersecurity framework is IT-ish. Everyone uses it. NIST 800-83 just came out. Version 3 of it just came out, and it's focused on applying all that stuff into the industrial space. And so it's much more industry focused. I use it routinely. It's got really a very readable first 100 pages of kind of introduction. So I recommend very much the 800-83 standard. Courses, standards, certifications. Is there anything else that we've missed? What would you encourage people to do to make the transition?
I think the other big thing that we didn't talk about that I like to focus on, because I see how rewarding it can be, is to get people involved with the community as a whole. So completely different type of networking that we've been talking about. But when you look at and I understand, at least speaking from my own experience, I'm an extreme introvert. I don't want to get out and talk to people as much as I might seem to, and so the last thing necessarily I want to do is get out and talk. And at the same time, it's so amazing whether you go to a class or you're on social media like LinkedIn, right? And you're getting to talk with people from all over the world, from different backgrounds and different perspectives, and they work in IT and OT, and they have different experiences, and they work in different types of environments. You can learn from so many different people that are out there, and you can also share from your own experiences and they can learn as well. So it's really amazing experience. You can also see that when you go to conferences. So I always encourage people, whether you try to go to some of the larger conferences like the SANS ICS Summit or S4, or maybe even some of the smaller, more local conferences like B-Sides, that you can get together with people, and everybody's there really just to learn and share and have a good time. It's just very easy, and I see this all the time for people in both IT and OT, where we're just doing their job, we're keeping our head down, got the blinders on, we're just getting things taken care of. But if we're not out there, not only learning and sharing with each other, but also, understanding what's evolving out there in the world, right? We need to make sure we're staying current and understanding what's going on, right? I'm the ICS OT cybersecurity landscape has changed drastically over the last 2.5 years. I would say even more so in just the last couple of months, if not just the last couple of weeks, right? We had news of the power being turned off in the Ukraine again back in 2022, even though they just announced it. Not sure why it took so long, but that's definitely an involvement or evolution to understand how that it was not ICS specific malware. That was living off the land techniques that were used in that attack. Right, that's something that we need to be aware of as OT defenders. We can look at the Danish coordinated attack by, I think, allegedly Sandworm, right, which was detected by the Sector CERT team, right, and that alone has other implications that we all need to understand and be aware of as OT cybersecurity defenders. So if we're just doing the job, keeping our heads down, and we're not out there talking in the community, we're not on social media, like on LinkedIn, sharing information and reading the latest news and out there going to the conferences, listening to the podcast, reading the books. If we're not staying up to date, we're not staying current, then ultimately we're not doing our job as cybersecurity defenders of our OT environments.
Andrew, had Mike not have said that, I haven't necessarily had the feeling that lately industrial security has changed all that much. If anything, one of the cases that he's referencing there in Ukraine was sort of a rehash of a few incidents that had occurred between Ukraine and Russia before. I don't know. Do you disagree with me? Do you feel like things are really rapidly moving these days?
I don't know about rapidly, but things are changing, and I'm not sure that a lot of practitioners are tracking these changes. So the change he mentioned was living off the land. For anyone out there who doesn't already know what that is, it's using, instead of writing your own malware, your own remote access Trojan, your own virus, your own who knows what, instead of writing your own attack tools that have signatures that antivirus might detect, that are artifacts of code that can be detected on a machine. You're using the tools that are already built into Windows or Linux or whatnot. I mean, Linux is a treasure trove of tools. And so if you look at a compromised machine, there's really no evidence. There's nothing installed on the machine that shouldn't be there. If you look at network traffic, it's the traffic that sort of normal allowed tools are putting on the network. And so it's sort of more devious than average. Is it new? Well, I mean, people have been talking about this in the IT space for a while. I think it's newish in the OT space. Something else that's changed that people are not tracking is, the latest Waterfall threat report shows that this decade, since 2020, the attack world has changed. We've gone from a state for a whole decade where cyber attacks with physical consequences, the lights go out as in the Ukraine, or equipment is damaged as in the, the steel mill in Germany a decade ago. These attacks used to be sort of trickling along at 1 or 2 or 3 a year. And now we're starting to see what looks like exponential increase. We went from 5 in 2019 to 18 to 23 to 57 last year. The world has changed. Is it dramatic and fast? I don't know, but we do have to keep track of these. It's been great. Thank you for joining us. Before we let you go, can you sum up for us? Can you what should we take away? What are the most important things to remember if we're either on the IT side or the engineering side wanting to make the leap into OT security?
Sure. I think the main points is it doesn't matter if you come from IT like myself, if you come from OT background like many of my colleagues, it's the IT side of the house, it's the OT side of the house. We all live and work in the same house. We all want to protect the same house. We have to work together to be able to do that. And not everybody in IT wants to learn about OT, and not everybody in OT wants to learn about cybersecurity. So if you're one of those people that does, and when you encounter others that are like you and that they do as well, right, learn and work with each other and share and encourage each other, because it's going to take all of us together to protect our very unique and critical environments. Because as we just touched on, just real briefly, the threat landscape has started to change, dramatically, and it's only going to get worse from here. And it's going to be on all of us to make sure that we protect our environments, to help ensure, right, that we're protecting the world around us, right, for our families and our friends, and no matter where in the world we live, we're all in this together. I always like to talk about in protecting the world, but it does take us, all working together. So, but I appreciate you having me on the podcast. But I do appreciate the time for being on the podcast, the invite. It was great to get to come and talk with you and share with everybody. Real quickly, if anybody's looking for us down the road, of course, you can find Fluor at fluor.com. You can check out jobs.fluor.com. I think we have about 1,300 openings right now for IT and, of course, OT engineering professionals all around the world. So definitely check out the site there. And if you're looking for me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. And you can also find my resources at mikeholcomb.com. So, but again, reach out anytime, and but I appreciate again the time and for everybody for listening to the episode.
Andrew, that was your interview with Mike Holcomb. Do you have any last word that you'd like to take us out with today?
Sure. I mean, what Mike said, makes perfect sense. Take training if you can afford it. SANS or ISA, or I wasn't aware of the TUV Rhineland or the EXITA training. Read the standards. I especially recommend the free NIST 800-83 that is focused on industrial systems. It's free. It's readable. When you have opportunity, try to attend some conferences. There tend to be conferences more local than more distant, controls your travel costs. And when you're at a conference, network, ask people questions. And, maybe to expand on that last one just a little bit, I've been attending conferences for over a decade because that's part of my job. I'm a techie, though. I struggle with networking. I had a really great networking experience at the ICS conference in Denmark just a couple of weeks ago. It's been 15 years, but I may finally have figured this out. When you get an expert in front of you with, a beer in their hand and a snack in the other, yes, introduce yourself, ask what they do. And then, from your knowledge of the field, ask a controversial question. I mean, I sat down with the folks at the Sector CERT. They were at the event in Denmark a couple of different times, continued the conversation on LinkedIn, eventually was bold enough to ask the question, this attack targeted Danish critical infrastructure. Why was there no report of any other infrastructure in the world being targeted? These firewalls that were exploited are used widely. The vulnerabilities were well known, and I got a useful answer. Now, it wasn't a clear answer because there's confidentiality agreements. There's only so much these experts can tell me, but I was always afraid of asking people controversial questions. And don't be. Experts love to talk about what they're doing. If they cannot tell you something, they will explain why they cannot tell you something. And that context in itself was useful for me in terms of understanding the scenario. So, I would encourage people to sign up to the SCADA mailing list or sign up to the ISA SP99 standards committee mailing lists. You get a lot of stuff. You don't have to read everything on these lists, but what you get is a sense of what people argue about and what's controversial, so that you have ammunition at your next networking session. So that's my little nugget of I had 3 really interesting, conversations at networking at this event in Denmark by asking questions that are a little bit controversial.
Well, with that, thank you to Mike for speaking with you, Andrew. And Andrew, thank you for speaking with me.
It's always a pleasure, Nate. Thank you so much.
This has been the Industrial Security Podcast from Waterfall. Thanks to everyone out there listening.